They called him broken, useless, half a man. When Elias Crow rolled off that train in his weathered wheelchair, the woman who'd sent for him took one look and spat the word disabled like poison. She rode away, leaving him stranded in the snow with nothing but shame and a town full of witnesses. But rejection isn't the end of every story. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Stay with me until the very end of this journey, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Because what happened next in Red Willow changed everything about what it means to be whole. The train's whistle cut through the February afternoon like a knife through frozen butter, sharp and unforgiving. Elias Crow felt the vibration through the wooden floor of the passenger car before he heard it. A deep, resonant thing that traveled up through the wheels of his chair and settled somewhere in his chest. He'd been feeling vibrations for 3 years now, ever since the mine collapse in Colorado took his legs and left him with hands that could still build anything and a mind that refused to quit. But hearts? Hearts were harder to account for. "Red Willow Station! Red Willow!" the conductor called, his voice carrying that practiced enthusiasm that came from saying the same thing 200 times without meaning it once. Last stop before the territorial line. Elias reached down and checked the brake on his wheelchair one more time. It was a habit born of necessity, not nervousness, though today he had plenty of cause for both. The chair was his own design, modified, reinforced, fitted with brake mechanisms he'd forged himself in a Denver workshop before he'd lost his job there too. People didn't like looking at him long enough to see what his hands could do. The train lurched, slowed, lurched again. Through the frost-glazed window, Elias could see the platform emerging from the white landscape like a dark scar. Red Willow wasn't much to look at. A handful of buildings hunched against the wind, smoke rising from chimneys, the inevitable water tower standing sentinel over it all. Frontier towns all looked the same when you were arriving with nothing but hope in your pockets. He'd sold almost everything to afford the train ticket. The advertisement in the Denver Post had been simple, almost terse. Widow seeks capable husband for ranch partnership. Must be skilled, sober, God-fearing. Letters to Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard, Red Willow, Wyoming Territory. Elias had written 3 drafts before sending the letter. In the first, he'd mentioned the wheelchair in the opening line. In the second, he'd buried it in the middle. In the final version, he'd described his carpentry skills, his literacy, his experience with livestock and irrigation systems. He'd mentioned almost casually that he used a wheeled chair for mobility but found it no hindrance to skilled labor. Her response had come 6 weeks later, short, businesslike. Arrival acceptable. February 14th. We'll meet train. He'd allowed himself to hope. That was his first mistake. The conductor appeared in the aisle, already reaching for Elias's worn leather bag on the overhead rack. "Need help getting down, sir?" "Just the bag. I can manage the rest." The conductor's face did that thing faces always did. A flicker of uncertainty, quickly smoothed over with professional courtesy. "Yes, sir. Platform's got some ice on it. Mind yourself." Elias had learned not to finish those sentences for people. It never helped. The train had barely shuddered to a complete stop before Elias began the familiar choreography of departure. Break off. Hands to wheels. Forward 6 feet to the wider space near the door where the conductor was already lowering the step stool. The cold hit him first when the door opened. Wyoming cold, the kind that found every gap in your clothing and reminded you that February in the territories didn't care about your plans or your pride. "Want me to fetch someone?" the conductor asked, hovering. "I'm expected." It took 3 other passengers, a male clerk and a salesman with a carpet bag, to crowd past Elias at the door, each offering variations of "pardon me" and "excuse me" without quite meeting his eyes. Then it was his turn. The conductor had positioned a wooden ramp, standard railroad issue, warped and splintered but functional. Elias had been down 1,000 ramps. This one was no different, except for what waited at the bottom. The platform was crowded with the usual station chaos. People greeting arrivals, drivers loading freight, a dog barking at pigeons. But Elias spotted her immediately because she was looking directly at the train with an expression of such focused anticipation that it stood out like a spotlight in the general bustle. Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard was perhaps 40, perhaps older. The frontier had a way of adding years that had nothing to do with calendars. She wore a heavy wool coat that had once been expensive, a fur collar turned up against the wind, and a hat pinned severely to dark hair streaked with early gray. Her face had the kind of handsomeness that came from strong bones and stronger will, and her eyes, even from this distance, had the evaluation in them of someone accustomed to buying livestock. Elias descended the ramp with the smooth efficiency of long practice. The wheels of his chair crunched on ice crystals scattered across the platform boards. He'd worn his best clothes, the only suit he owned, brushed and pressed in his cramped Denver boarding house room. His hat was new, purchased specifically for this occasion. He'd shaved that morning on the train, using a basin of cold water and a mirror that wouldn't stay still. He'd wanted to make a good impression. Mrs. Pritchard's expression changed the moment his chair cleared the ramp and rolled into full view on the platform. It was a subtle thing, a tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible backward step, a shift in the set of her jaw. Elias had seen that look before. He'd seen it in the faces of potential employers, landlords, the families of women who'd once smiled at him in church socials. He wheeled toward her anyway, navigating around a stack of freight crates and a woman with 3 children clustered around her skirts. "Mrs. Pritchard?" He stopped his chair 6 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to not seem presumptuous. "I'm Elias Crow, from Denver." She stared at him. Around them, the station noise continued, the hiss of the engine, conversations, the thud of luggage being loaded onto wagons. But in the space between them, there was only silence and the visible calculus happening behind her eyes. "You're—" she began, then stopped. Started again. "The letter didn't mention that I use a wheelchair." Elias kept his voice level, pleasant even. He'd practiced this too. "I apologize if that wasn't clear. I can assure you it doesn't affect my capability for the work you described. I have references from 3 Denver—" "Capability?" The word came out harder than she'd probably intended. A few heads nearby turned. She noticed and lowered her voice, but not the edge in it. "Mr. Crow, I run a working ranch, 1,500 acres, 60 head of cattle, horses, irrigation ditches that freeze every winter and need constant maintenance. I need a partner who can ride fence lines, wrestle steers, work from dawn until dark in all conditions. I understand the requirements, ma'am. I assure you—" "Look at you." She gestured at his chair with one gloved hand, the motion quick and dismissive. "You can't even stand." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Several people on the platform had stopped pretending not to listen. Elias could feel their attention like heat on his face, though the wind was cold enough to make his eyes water. "Mrs. Pritchard," he said carefully, "I've worked in mines, sawmills, and machine shops. I've built irrigation systems and repaired engines. I can read engineering diagrams and keep account books. The letter you sent described a ranch partnership, a husband." Her voice cut through his words like an axe through kindling. "I advertised for a husband, Mr. Crow. A man capable of running a ranch and providing children and standing beside me in church and at town functions. I need a—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound as brutal as the ones trying to escape. "I need someone whole." The silence after that statement seemed to spread outward from them like ripples in water. Even the dog had stopped barking. Somewhere behind Elias, he heard someone whisper to someone else, words he couldn't quite catch but could perfectly imagine. He should have stood his ground, should have argued his case, presented his references, explained all the adaptations he'd made, the life he'd built despite everything. But the look on her face, not quite disgust, not quite pity, but something worse that combined them both, took all the carefully prepared words and rendered them useless. "I see," he said quietly. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. The fault is partly mine." Mrs. Pritchard had the grace to look uncomfortable now, though whether from genuine regret or the growing audience, Elias couldn't tell. "I should have been more specific in my requirements. I'll pay your return ticket to Denver, of course. It's only fair." "That won't be necessary. Mr. Crow, surely you can't intend to stay in Red Willow. There's nothing here for someone in your situation." There it was again. Your situation. As if being in a wheelchair was something that had happened to him yesterday, and not something he'd lived with, worked with, built a life around for 3 years. I'll find something, he said. Mrs. Pritchard reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather purse. At least let me give you something for the journey. I feel terrible about this misunderstanding. No. The firmness in his voice made her hand stop halfway to offering him money. For just a moment, something flickered in her expression. Maybe respect, maybe just surprise that he'd refused her charity. Then her face closed again, professional and remote. Very well. I wish you luck, Mr. Crow. I truly do. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking smartly on the wooden platform. Elias watched her go, watched her meet a tall man in a ranch hand's coat who'd been standing by a wagon at the far end of the platform. Watched them converse briefly. He could imagine that conversation before she climbed up onto the wagon seat and drove away without looking back. The crowd on the platform began to disperse now that the show was over. A few people glanced at Elias as they passed, some with sympathy, some with the careful blankness that was worse than sympathy. The conductor emerged from the passenger car with the last of the luggage, saw Elias still sitting there, and had the decency to look away quickly. Elias sat very still for a long moment, his hands resting on the wheels of his chair. The train was already preparing to depart, steam building for the next leg of the journey. He could get back on, could go back to Denver, back to the boarding house where the landlady charged him extra for the ground floor room, back to the machine shops where they'd hire him for a few weeks before finding reasons to let him go. Or he could stay here in this frozen nothing of a town where he'd just been publicly rejected before he'd even had a chance to prove himself. The train whistle blew. Final call. Elias turned his chair away from the train and wheeled himself toward the edge of the platform, toward the ramp that led down to the street level. His bag, the leather one with all his tools and the few books he'd kept, was still sitting on the platform where the conductor had left it. "Excuse me, son." The voice belonged to an older man in a station master's uniform, badge glinting dully in the weak sunlight. "You planning to stay or go? Train's about to leave." "I'm staying." The station master looked at him with an expression that suggested he thought this was a very poor decision. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. She might have a room, but—" He glanced at the chair, at the 3 wooden steps leading down from the platform to street level. "But I'd need to get there first," Elias finished. "Those steps removable?" "What?" "The steps. Are they fixed or freestanding?" The station master blinked. I suppose they just sit there. Railroad put them in when they built the platform. Why?" Elias wheeled over to the steps and examined them. 3 risers, each about 8 inches high, the whole structure maybe 3 feet wide and solidly built from weathered lumber. Not fixed to the platform, just heavy enough that no one had bothered to move them in years. "I can build a ramp," Elias said, "if you have some planks in your maintenance shed. I'll do it myself, no charge." "Build a ramp?" The station master's tone suggested Elias had just proposed building a bridge to the moon. "Son, those are station steps. Railroad property. And that's a railroad wheelchair ramp law in most territories now, required at all public stations." Elias had no idea if this was true in Wyoming, but he said it with enough confidence that the station master hesitated. "I'd have to check with—" "I'll build it today. Have it done before the evening train. If the railroad doesn't like it, they can tear it down tomorrow. And you can say some stranger did it without permission." Behind them, the train whistle blew again. The engine began to chuff, wheels starting to turn. The station master glanced at the departing train, then back at Elias, then at the steps. "Maintenance sheds around back," he said finally. "You break anything, you pay for it." "Fair enough." The train pulled away from the platform with gathering speed, trailing steam and smoke. Elias watched it go, watched his easy way out disappear into the white distance, and felt something in his chest that might have been fear, or might have been liberation. He wheeled back to collect his bag, then made his way around the side of the station building. The maintenance shed was unlocked. Territories were trusting that way, or maybe just careless. Inside, he found lumber, nails, a serviceable hammer, and a saw that needed sharpening but would work. The afternoon sun was already starting its early winter descent by the time Elias had measured, cut, and assembled a functional ramp beside the station steps. His hands were numb despite his gloves, and his shoulders ached from the work, but the ramp was solid, angled at exactly the grade he needed, reinforced at the stress points, and wide enough for his chair with room to spare. He tested it once, twice, 3 times. It held. A few townspeople had stopped to watch during the construction. Most had moved on after a few minutes, but one man, older, wearing a blacksmith's apron under his coat, had stayed the whole time, leaning against the station wall and smoking a pipe. "You know anything about brake mechanisms?" the man asked as Elias rolled up the ramp one final time to collect his tools. "Some. Why?" "Got a freight wagon with a brake that sticks every time it's cold. Been meaning to fix it, but I'm better with horseshoes than mechanical work." The blacksmith puffed his pipe, studying Elias with the neutral assessment of someone evaluating a tool, not a person. "Pay you $2 if you can fix it." $2. Elias had exactly $11.30 to his name, all the money left after buying the train ticket he couldn't use to go back. "I'd need to see it first," Elias said. "Make sure I've got the right approach before I promise anything." "Fair enough. Name's Tom Birch. Smithy's on 2nd Street, across from the grain elevator. Can't miss it." Tom Birch walked away without offering his hand. Not out of rudeness, Elias thought, but because his own hands were black with forge work, and he knew Elias's were full of tools. It was a small thing, but small things mattered when you'd spent the afternoon being called incomplete. The boarding house Mrs. Chen ran turned out to be a narrow 3-story building squeezed between a dry goods store and a dress shop. The front steps were, predictably, impossible. Elias wheeled around to the back alley and found a service entrance at ground level, though he had to navigate around garbage bins and a frozen puddle to reach it. He knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened to reveal a tiny Chinese woman in an apron, her gray hair pulled back severely, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "No beggars," she said immediately. "I'm not begging. I need a room. I can pay." Mrs. Chen looked at him, at his chair, at his bag of tools. Her expression gave away exactly nothing. "How long?" "Don't know yet. At least a few days. $1 a day. Includes breakfast. No cooking in rooms, no drinking, no women." She paused. "Payment in advance." "I can give you 3 days now. Need to find work before I can commit to more." 3 days. She held out her hand, palm up. Elias counted out $3, leaving him with $8.30 between survival and disaster. Mrs. Chen pocketed the money without counting it, then stepped aside. "Ground floor room and back. Only one I got that's—" She gestured at his chair. "That's accessible?" "That you can get to without stairs. Same thing." She led him through a narrow hallway that smelled of cooking oil and lye soap. The boarding house was clean but worn, everything functional and nothing decorative. She opened a door near the back of the building. "Here." The room was barely larger than a storage closet. A narrow bed, a small table, a single chair with a broken slat in the back. One window looked out onto the alley. No stove, no wash basin, not even a rug on the floor. It was the kind of room you gave someone you didn't expect to stay long. "Privy's out back," Mrs. Chen said. "Washroom's down the hall. Breakfast is 6:30. You late, you don't eat." "Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Chen." She paused in the doorway, studying him with that same evaluating expression. "That woman at the station, the one who left you there, she was stupid." Elias looked up, surprised. "Stupid to judge a man by his legs," Mrs. Chen continued. "When I came to America, people judged me for my face, my language, my sex. Told me I was less. I proved them wrong every day for 30 years. She tapped the doorframe with one knuckle. "You proved them wrong too. Or don't. Your choice." She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Elias sat alone in the tiny room as the winter afternoon faded to evening outside his window. He could hear the sounds of the boarding house around him, footsteps overhead, voices in distant rooms, the clang of pots from what must be the kitchen, normal sounds of normal lives being lived by normal people. He transferred from his chair to the bed, which creaked but held. Then he lay back and stared at the water-stained ceiling, feeling the weight of the day settling on him like snow. He'd left Denver with a plan. Answer the advertisement, meet the widow, prove his worth, build a life. Simple, reasonable. The kind of plan that worked if you were whole. But he wasn't whole, was he? That's what Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard had said, right there on the platform for everyone to hear. That's what the looks and the whispers and the carefully averted eyes had been telling him for 3 years. You're not whole. You're less than. You're broken. Elias closed his eyes and remembered the mine. He'd been 24 years old, strong as an ox, able to work 12-hour shifts without slowing down. He'd had a girl back then, Sarah, with red hair and freckles and a laugh that made you want to hear it again. They'd talked about marriage, about buying land, about the kind of future you could build if you worked hard enough and wanted it badly enough. Then the support beam had given way in Tunnel 6, and Elias had woken up 3 days later in a hospital bed with a doctor telling him very carefully that they'd done everything they could, that he was lucky to be alive, that modern medicine could work miracles, but some things were beyond repair. Sarah had visited once. She'd cried, held his hand, told him she was sorry. She'd never visited again. His father had written one letter, "Come home when you can work again." Elias had taught himself to work again, had designed his chair, learned to adapt every task, proved he could do anything that didn't require standing. But people couldn't see past the wheels, couldn't see his hands, his mind, his determination, just the chair, the damage, the brokenness. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Yeah?" The door opened to reveal a young man, maybe 19 or 20, carrying a tray with a bowl of soup, a chunk of bread, and a cup of water. "Mrs. Chen said to bring this. You missed dinner service, but she figured—" The young man shrugged. "Anyway, here." He set the tray on the small table, then hesitated in the doorway. "I'm Daniel. I help out around here. Any heavy lifting or maintenance you need, just let me know." "I'm Elias. Thank you for the food." Daniel nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Hey, I saw what happened at the station with Mrs. Pritchard. That was rough." Word travels fast. It's a small town. Everybody knows everything by sunset. Daniel shifted his weight, uncomfortable but apparently determined to say something. For what it's worth, Adelaide Pritchard's been running that ranch alone since her husband died 2 years ago. She's hard as nails and twice as sharp. If she couldn't see what you might bring to a partnership, that's her loss, not yours. "That's kind of you to say." "I'm not being kind, I'm being honest. Tom Birch already told half the town about the ramp you built at the station. Said it was the best piece of practical engineering he'd seen in years. And Tom doesn't compliment anybody." Daniel grinned. "Anyway, welcome to Red Willow. It's not much, but it's got potential. You'll see." After Daniel left, Elias ate the soup, chicken broth with vegetables, simple but good, and thought about potential. About second chances and fresh starts, and the possibility that maybe being rejected wasn't always the end of the story. Through his window, he could see lights coming on in buildings across the alley. Could hear the sounds of Red Willow settling in for the night, horses being stabled, shop shutters being closed, a piano playing somewhere in the distance. The town was going about its business, indifferent to his presence or absence, his success or failure, which meant he could be anyone here, could build anything, as long as he kept moving forward. Elias finished his soup, washed his face in the wash basin Daniel brought him, and prepared for his first night in Red Willow. Tomorrow, he'd fix Tom Birch's wagon brake. He'd find more work. He'd prove that rejection wasn't a verdict, just an opinion. And maybe, if he was lucky and worked hard enough, he'd prove that wholeness had nothing to do with standing. The morning arrived with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. Elias woke to frost patterns on his window and the distant clang of Mrs. Chen's breakfast bell echoing through the boarding house. He dressed quickly, transferred to his chair, and made his way down the narrow hallway to the dining room where 6 other boarders were already gathered around a long table. The conversation stopped when he wheeled in. Not dramatically, just that subtle shift in energy that came when something unexpected entered a familiar space. Elias had learned to ignore it, or at least pretend to ignore it. He found a spot at the end of the table where his chair fit without blocking the aisle. "Coffee?" Mrs. Chen appeared with a pot, not waiting for an answer before filling his cup. "Eggs and bacon. Eat fast. Kitchen closes in 20 minutes." The other boarders returned to their conversations. Talk of weather, freight schedules, the price of grain. One man, a traveling salesman by the look of his clothes, kept glancing at Elias between bites of bacon, working up to something. Finally he spoke. "You're the fellow from yesterday, at the station." "That's right." "Hell of a thing, that. Mrs. Pritchard just leaving you there like that." The salesman shook his head. No offense, but what were you thinking? Coming all this way for a mail order situation in your condition? Daniel, who'd been eating silently at the other end of the table, set down his fork with enough force to make it ring against the plate. Maybe he was thinking he's a skilled tradesman looking for honest work, Fred. Same as anybody else. I'm just saying it seems like you're just saying things that aren't your business, Daniel cut him off. Pass the salt. The tension dissolved as quickly as it had formed, but Elias felt a flicker of something unexpected. Gratitude, maybe. Or just surprise that someone would defend him without being asked. He caught Daniel's eye across the table and nodded slightly. Daniel nodded back and returned to his eggs. After breakfast, Elias wheeled out into the brittle morning air and made his way down 2nd Street to Tom Birch's smithy. The street was already busy despite the cold, wagons hauling freight, a few riders on horseback, women in heavy coats moving between shops. Most people stepped aside when they saw him coming. A few stared openly. One small boy pointed until his mother swatted his hand down and pulled him along faster. The smithy was easy to find, just as Tom had said. The building radiated heat even from the street, and the ring of hammer on anvil carried clear and sharp in the frozen air. Elias wheeled through the open doorway into a space that smelled of coal smoke, hot metal, and horse sweat. Tom Birch was working a piece of iron on his anvil, each strike precise and measured. He glanced up when Elias entered, but didn't stop working until the piece was shaped to his satisfaction. Then he plunged it into a water barrel with a hiss of steam and turned. Wasn't sure you'd show, Tom said. You offered paying work. Why wouldn't I? Fair point. Tom gestured toward the back of the shop where a freight wagon sat with one wheel removed. Brakes on the rear axle. Mechanism seizes up when it gets below freezing. Makes the wagon dangerous on any kind of hill. Elias wheeled over and examined the setup. The brake was a simple lever system with a friction pad that pressed against the wheel hub. Standard design, but the pivot point had clearly been exposed to moisture and was rusting. He could see where someone had tried to oil it, but oil wasn't the answer. The whole pivot assembly needed to be cleaned, possibly replaced. You got a wire brush and some kerosene? Elias asked. Got both. You thinking you can fix it? Thinking I need to take it apart first and see what we're working with. For the next 2 hours, Elias worked while Tom attended to other business, shoeing horses, repairing a broken plow blade, consulting with a rancher about custom hinges for a barn door. The smithy was a comfortable place to work. The heat from the forge kept the worst of the cold at bay, and Tom didn't hover or offer unnecessary help. He just let Elias work. The problem with the brake turned out to be exactly what Elias had suspected. Corrosion in the pivot assembly combined with a slightly bent lever arm that put stress on the mechanism at the wrong angle. He disassembled everything, cleaned each piece with kerosene and the wire brush, filed down the burrs that had formed on the pivot pin, and used a hammer and Tom's anvil to true the lever arm. Then he reassembled it, tested the action, and applied a thin coat of graphite powder instead of oil. Try it now, Elias said. Tom worked the brake lever. It moved smoothly, no catching, no resistance. He worked it again, harder. Still smooth. He looked at Elias with something like respect. How'd you know to use graphite instead of oil? Oil attracts moisture in cold weather. Moisture causes rust. Graphite doesn't attract water, and it doesn't freeze. Elias wiped his hands on a rag. Should work fine unless the temperature drops below -20, and if it does, brake failure's probably the least of your problems. Tom tested the brake one more time, then nodded. $2, like I promised. But I got another question for you. What's that? You looking for steady work, or you just passing through? Elias considered the question carefully. Steady work meant commitment, meant putting down roots in a town where he'd been publicly rejected less than 24 hours ago. But it also meant survival, and survival was a prerequisite for everything else. I could use steady work, he said. Got a lot of repair jobs that pile up around here. Wagons, tools, equipment, things I don't have time for or don't have the right touch for. Pays not much, maybe $8, $10 a week depending on the work, but it's regular. You'd work here in the shop, use my tools, keep what you make on side jobs. Tom paused. Only catch is people might not like doing business with a smithy that employs that has you working here. A cripple, Elias finished. You can say it. I don't use that word, but others will. Just want you to know what you'd be walking into. Elias thought about his dwindling money, about Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and the need to eat and the long winter stretching ahead. He thought about Denver and the jobs he'd lost, the opportunities that had evaporated the moment people saw his chair. He thought about having to go back, having to admit that maybe Mrs. Pritchard had been right about there being nothing here for someone in his situation. "I'll take the work," he said. Tom held out his hand. "Then we got a deal." They shook on it, and something in Elias's chest loosened slightly. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling of having found solid ground after days of falling. "Can you start tomorrow?" Tom asked. "Got 3 busted wagon wheels need repair and a whole box of tools that need sharpening." "I'll be here at 7. Tom paid him the $2, and Elias wheeled out of the smithy into the midday cold, feeling like maybe, possibly, things might work out after all. The feeling lasted approximately half a block. "Hey, cripple!" The voice came from across the street. Elias didn't turn at first. He'd learned that responding to that particular word rarely led anywhere good. But the voice called again, louder and sharper. "You deaf and crippled? I'm talking to you." This time Elias stopped and looked. A man stood in front of the general store, mid-30s, heavy-set, wearing a shopkeeper's apron over his clothes. He had the kind of face that suggested he smiled a lot, but he wasn't smiling now. "You the one Adelaide Pritchard brought in yesterday?" the man called out. Several people on the street had stopped to watch. Apparently this was going to be entertainment. "I'm the one she sent for," Elias said carefully. "Don't know that she brought me anywhere. Heard she took one look at you and sent you packing. Smart woman, Adelaide, knows better than to saddle herself with damaged goods." The words hung in the cold air like a challenge. Elias could feel the attention of the street focused on him, waiting to see how he'd respond. This was a test, he realized, not from this particular man, from the town itself. How he handled this moment would determine how he'd be treated going forward. "I appreciate your interest in my personal affairs," Elias said, keeping his voice level, "but I've got work to do. Excuse me." He started to wheel past, but the man stepped off the boardwalk and into the street, blocking his path. "I'm talking to you. It's rude to just wheel away when someone's talking to you. And it's rude to yell insults at strangers, but here we are." Elias looked up at the man, refusing to show the anger building in his chest. "Now, if you'll excuse me, you planning to stay in Red Willow? Because I'm not sure we need your kind here. We got enough problems without adding charity cases." "Lloyd, that's enough." The new voice came from behind Elias. He glanced back to see Tom Birch walking up the street, his leather apron still on, a hammer hanging from his belt. "Man's got a right to be here same as anyone." Lloyd, apparently that was the shopkeeper's name, sneered. "You hiring him, Tom? That's a mistake. Nobody's going to want to do business with you if you've got a cripple working in your shop." "Then I guess we'll find out," Tom said. "Now move along. Some of us have work to do." For a moment it looked like Lloyd might push the confrontation further, but Tom was bigger, harder, and had a reputation in town that clearly carried weight. Lloyd stepped back onto the boardwalk with a theatrical sigh. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when your business suffers." He looked at Elias. "And you. Maybe you should think about moving on. Red Willow's not a place for people who can't pull their weight." He went back into his store, letting the door slam behind him. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse, the show apparently over. Tom stood beside Elias for a moment, watching them go. "Lloyd Hutchins," Tom said. "Runs the general store. He's all bark, no bite, but he does like to hear himself talk." "Seems like I'm making friends fast," Elias said. "You're making waves." "Different thing. Town like this, it takes a while for new people to be accepted. Takes even longer for people who are different. But it happens, if you stick it out." Tom paused. "Question is, you planning to stick it out?" Elias looked down the street at the town that had already rejected him once and seemed determined to do it again. He thought about the easy option, take what was left of his money, buy a ticket back to Denver, find some other place where people didn't know him and didn't care. Start over somewhere else. But he'd been starting over somewhere else for 3 years now. At some point, you had to stop running and start standing your ground, even if you couldn't actually stand. Yeah, he said. I'm planning to stick it out. Tom nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Good. Come by the shop at 7 tomorrow. Bring your appetite. My wife always sends too much lunch. He walked back toward the smithy, leaving Elias alone on the street. The cold was starting to seep through his coat, and his hands were going numb. He needed to get moving, needed to get out of the wind. But first, he needed supplies. The general store, Lloyd's store, was the closest place to buy what he needed. But Elias turned his chair in the opposite direction and wheeled 2 blocks down to a smaller shop with Chen's goods painted on the window. If Mrs. Chen ran a boarding house, maybe she ran other businesses too. The shop was narrow and crowded with merchandise, dry goods, canned food, tools, fabric, a little bit of everything. A young Chinese woman stood behind the counter, maybe 20 years old, with her hair in a neat braid and an expression of polite wariness. "Can I help you?" she asked in perfect English. "You related to Mrs. Chen at the boarding house?" "She's my mother. I'm Mei Chen." "Your mother said I should prove people wrong. I'm here to buy supplies so I can start doing that." Mei Chen's wariness shifted to something closer to curiosity. "You're the man from the station, the one Mrs. Pritchard rejected. Word really does travel fast in this town. My mother told me about you this morning. She said you had determination." Mei looked at him more carefully. "She doesn't say that about many people. What supplies do you need?" Elias bought pencils, paper, a small lantern, oil for the lantern, and a loaf of bread that would supplement the boarding house meals. It cost him 80 cents, more than he wanted to spend, but all necessary. Mei Chen wrapped everything efficiently and didn't try to help him carry it to his chair. She just handed him the package and gave him the same evaluating look her mother had given him. "Lloyd Hutchins was telling people you're a charity case who can't work," she said. "Is that true?" "I just fixed Tom Birch's freight wagon brake. You can ask him if I can work." "I'm asking you." Elias met her eyes. "I can work. I can build, repair, design, create. I can do anything that doesn't require standing. And most of the time, I can figure out ways around that too." Mei nodded slowly. "Good. Because this town needs people who can work. It doesn't need people who make excuses." She paused. "Lloyd Hutchins is an idiot. Don't let him make you think everyone here thinks like he does." "I'll try to remember that." As Elias wheeled out of the shop, he caught sight of someone watching him from across the street. A woman in a worn coat, dark hair escaping from beneath a faded bonnet, a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She wasn't staring the way most people stared. She was looking at him with the kind of attention that suggested she was seeing something specific, evaluating something particular. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into an alley between 2 buildings. Elias wheeled back to the boarding house as the afternoon light began to fail. The wind had picked up, blowing snow in horizontal sheets down the street. By the time he reached the back entrance, his face was numb, and his fingers could barely work the doorknob. He got inside, got to his room, and spent the rest of the day warming up by the small stove Daniel brought him. "Mrs. Chen's orders," Daniel had said, not quite meeting his eyes. That evening, Elias sat at his small table and began to sketch. It was something he'd done since childhood, drawing plans, designing solutions to problems, working through ideas on paper before trying to build them in reality. Tonight, he drew a better wheelchair. His current one was functional, but it was heavy, hard to maneuver, and the wheels wore down quickly on rough terrain. He sketched improvements, lighter materials, better wheel design, a more efficient brake system. He was so absorbed in the work that he almost missed the knock on his door. "It's open," he called. Daniel stuck his head in. "Mrs. Chen says there's stew if you want it. Also," he hesitated. "Also, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" "Woman named Martha Hale. Says she has work for you, if you're interested." Elias set down his pencil. "Send her in." Daniel disappeared and returned a moment later with the woman Elias had seen earlier, the one who'd been watching him from across the street. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 30, with a face that might have been pretty if it hadn't been so worn by work and weather. Her hands were red and chapped, and there was a permanent crease between her eyebrows that suggested she'd spent a lot of time frowning at problems that had no good solutions. "Mr. Crow," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm Martha Hale. I run the laundry on 4th Street. What can I do for you, Mrs. Hale?" "Miss, and I'll get right to it. I saw what you did at the station yesterday, the ramp you built." She glanced at his chair, then back at his face. "I need a ramp built for my laundry porch. Been needing one for months, but the carpenters in town either charge too much or do sloppy work. Tom Birch says you're good with your hands. Says that ramp at the station is the best piece of practical building he's seen." "That's kind of him to say?" "Tom doesn't say things to be kind. He says them because they're true." Martha pulled a small cloth purse from her coat pocket. "I can pay $2 for the work. It's not much, I know, but it's what I can afford. Lumber's in the shed behind the laundry, left over from when I tried to build it myself. If you can use it, you're welcome to it." Elias studied her face. She wasn't offering him work out of pity. He could see that. She needed something built, and she'd heard he could build it. It was as simple and as complicated as that. "I'd need to see the porch first," he said. "Make sure I understand what you need. Can you come by tomorrow, after you finish at Tom's shop?" "I can come by around 4. Martha nodded, then pulled out the purse and counted out $2 onto his table. "Half now, half when it's done. That's how I do business. You don't need to pay until the work's finished. And you don't need to work without knowing you'll be paid. I've seen enough men in this town promise work and then disappear with the money." She pushed the coins toward him. "Take it." Elias took the money, and Martha turned to leave. But at the door she paused. "What Lloyd Hutchins said to you today, about you being damaged goods." She didn't look at him while she spoke, just kept her eyes on the doorframe. "Lloyd Hutchins is married to a woman he treats like property, and runs a business by cheating anyone who can't read his ledgers. He's got no business judging anyone's worth." "You heard about that already?" "I hear about most things. Laundry work means people talk around you like you're not there. You learn things." Now she did look back at him. "People in this town will judge you for that chair. They'll assume things. But there are also people who'll judge you for your work, your character, how you treat others. Focus on those people. The rest don't matter." She left before Elias could respond, her footsteps fading down the hallway. He sat at his table, looking at the $2 she'd left, and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly. More like possibility. The sense that maybe this town had more than one story to tell about him, and maybe he'd have some say in which story won out. The next morning, Elias arrived at Tom's smithy at 7 sharp and spent the day repairing wagon wheels and sharpening tools. The work was methodical and satisfying, the kind of labor where you could see immediate results, where a broken thing became functional again under your hands. Tom worked alongside him, occasionally offering advice, but mostly letting Elias figure things out himself. Around noon, Tom's wife arrived with lunch, sandwiches, apples, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. She was a round, cheerful woman named Irene, who greeted Elias as if she'd known him for years. "Tom says you're the one who fixed the freight wagon brake," she said, handing him a sandwich. "Said you figured out the problem in about 5 minutes. Took him 3 days to even identify what was wrong." "Tom's being modest," Elias said. "Tom's never modest. If he says you're good, you're good." Irene poured coffee into tin cups. "You settling in all right at Mrs. Chen's place?" "Well enough. That woman's a saint, even if she doesn't smile much. Came to this town 20 years ago with nothing, built her businesses from scratch. People gave her hell for being Chinese, for being a woman, for being successful. She outlasted them all." Irene handed Tom his coffee. "You'll do all right here if you're half as stubborn as she is." At 4 o'clock, Elias wheeled down 4th Street to the laundry. It was easy to spot. A narrow building with steam rising from vents in the roof and the perpetual smell of soap and wet fabric hanging in the air. The front porch had 3 steps leading up to it, and Elias could see immediately why Martha needed a ramp. Getting heavy baskets of laundry up those steps multiple times a day would be brutal work. Martha emerged from inside carrying a basket of clean sheets. When she saw Elias, she set the basket down and came to the edge of the porch. "You came," she said. "Said I would." She led him around to the back where the porch was lower, only 1 step here instead of 3, but still inaccessible for wheeled carts or anyone who couldn't navigate stairs easily. The lumber she'd mentioned was stacked neatly in a shed nearby, rough-cut pine boards, some weathered but most still good. I need to be able to roll a cart up here, Martha explained. I pick up laundry from people around town, bring it back here to wash, then deliver it clean. Right now I'm carrying everything by hand because I can't get my cart up these steps. It's killing my back. Elias examined the porch, measured the height of the step, calculated the angle he'd need for the ramp. I can build it so the cart rolls up easy. You want sides on it so the cart doesn't slip off? If you can manage that, yes. I'll have it done by tomorrow evening. One condition, though. Martha tensed slightly. What condition? You let me test it with my chair first. If I can get up it smooth, your cart will have no problems. Something in her face relaxed. That's fair. Elias worked until dark, then came back the next morning after his shift at Tom's smithy. The ramp took shape slowly, precise cuts, careful angles, joints that fit snugly without gaps. He added side rails as promised, reinforced the weight-bearing points, and sanded the surface smooth enough that wheels wouldn't catch on splinters. Martha worked around him, hauling laundry in and out, hanging sheets on lines that stretched across the backyard. She didn't try to make conversation, didn't hover or offer unwanted help. She just worked, and occasionally she'd glance over at what he was building with an expression of quiet assessment. Late in the afternoon, when the ramp was finished, Elias tested it with his chair. The angle was perfect. Steep enough to save space, but shallow enough to climb without strain. He went up and down 3 times, testing the rails, checking for weak points. Everything held solid. Try your cart, he said. Martha brought out a wooden cart with 2 wheels and a handle. She loaded it with a basket of laundry and pushed it up the ramp. It rolled smoothly, no catching, no slipping. She pushed it up again with 2 baskets. Still smooth. She looked at Elias with something that might have been surprise or might have been respect. It's perfect, she said. Good. Elias held out his hand for the remaining $1. Martha paid him, then stood looking at the ramp for a long moment. You do good work, Mr. Crow. Elias, and thank you. Martha, and thank you. She paused. I've got other things that need fixing around here. If you're interested in more work. I'm interested. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias established a routine. Mornings at Tom's smithy, afternoons doing repair work around town. He fixed a broken door hinge for the Chinese doctor, rebuilt a bookshelf for the school teacher, repaired a wagon axle for a rancher who paid him $3 and didn't comment on his chair. He built a better brake system for his own wheelchair and started designing a lightweight cart that could be pulled behind it. The money wasn't much, but it was steady. He paid Mrs. Chen a week in advance and started setting aside small amounts for tools of his own. He ate Mrs. Chen's cooking, listened to Daniel's stories about growing up in frontier towns, and ignored Lloyd Hutchins when he saw him on the street. And he saw Martha Hale. Not intentionally at first, but Red Willow was small and their paths crossed naturally. At the general store, on the street, at Mrs. Chen's shop, where Martha bought soap in bulk for her laundry. They'd nod to each other, exchange brief greetings, move on. Nothing more than that. Until the day Elias found Martha sitting on the ground in the alley behind her laundry, her hand pressed against her face, blood seeping between her fingers. He'd been wheeling past on his way back to the boarding house when he heard the crash. The sound of something heavy falling, followed by a sharp cry that was cut off quickly, as if someone had forcibly swallowed it. He turned his chair into the alley and found her there, a laundry basket overturned beside her, sheets scattered in the dirt. Martha? She looked up, and he could see the gash above her eyebrow where something had caught her. I'm fine, just knocked over the basket. The corner hit me on the way down. You're bleeding pretty good for fine. Elias wheeled closer. You need to get that cleaned and wrapped. I will, in a minute. But she didn't move, just sat there in the cold dirt with her hand pressed to her head, and her expression somewhere between pain and exhaustion and something else Elias couldn't quite name. Let me help, he said. I know you don't need it. I'm offering anyway. For a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then she nodded, just once. Elias pulled his chair alongside her and took out his handkerchief, clean that morning, thank God. He wet it with water from his canteen and gently moved her hand away from the cut. The gash wasn't deep, but head wounds bled like fury. He pressed the handkerchief against it, applying steady pressure. Martha sat very still, her jaw tight. What happened? he asked. I was carrying the basket, lost my footing. I'm not usually that clumsy. He could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged. When's the last time you slept? I sleep. That's not what I asked. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then, I had 3 families ask for extra laundry service this week. Rush jobs, all of them. I've been working until midnight every night, starting again at 5 in the morning. I'm just tired. You can't work yourself into the ground. Says the man who works at the smithy all day and takes repair jobs all evening. That's different. How? Elias didn't have a good answer for that, so he just kept pressure on the cut until the bleeding slowed. When he pulled the handkerchief away, the wound was still oozing but no longer flowing. She'd need proper bandaging. Come on, he said. There's a doctor 2 streets over. Dr. Kim charges 50 cents just to look at you. Then it's a good thing I just got paid $3 for that wagon axle. Come on. He expected her to argue, but she just nodded again and let him help her to her feet. They made an odd pair walking down the street, her stumbling slightly, him wheeling beside her with one hand on his wheel and the other steadying her elbow. People stared, but Elias had stopped caring about people staring. Dr. Kim was a middle-aged Korean man with steady hands and a gentle manner. He cleaned Martha's wound, declared it not serious enough for stitches, and bandaged it with professional efficiency. He charged 40 cents, and Elias paid before Martha could object. You didn't have to do that, she said as they left the doctor's office. I know. I can pay you back. I don't want you to pay me back. She stopped walking and looked at him directly. Why are you being kind to me? The question caught him off guard. Why wouldn't I be? People aren't, not usually, not without wanting something. Elias met her eyes and saw something familiar there, the wariness of someone who'd been hurt too many times to trust easily, who'd learned that kindness often came with conditions. He recognized it because he saw the same thing in his own reflection every morning. I'm not being kind, he said. I'm just doing what anyone should do. What you did for me when you offered me work without caring about this chair. Martha studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Thank you, Elias. You're welcome, Martha. They walked back toward the laundry in comfortable silence, and something shifted between them. Something small but significant. An understanding, maybe. Or just the recognition that they were both fighting the same battles in different ways, and maybe fighting alone wasn't always necessary. When they reached the laundry, Martha paused at her new ramp. I've got soup on the stove inside. It's not much, but you're welcome to share it if you want. It was the first time anyone in Red Willow had invited Elias into their home. He thought about all the reasons to say no, propriety, not wanting to impose, the fact that accepting might complicate the simple working relationship they had. Then he thought about eating alone in his small room at the boarding house, about the kindness in her offer, about how tired she looked and how much easier it was to eat with company. I'd like that, he said. And for the first time since arriving in Red Willow, Elias Crow felt something that wasn't just survival or determination or stubborn refusal to quit. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to belong. Martha's soup was simple, potatoes, carrots, and a bit of salt pork. But it was warm and filling, and they ate it at her small kitchen table while the winter evening darkened outside. The laundry building was larger than Elias had expected from the outside. The front room held massive wash tubs and drying racks, but the back had been converted into modest living quarters. A kitchen, a bedroom he could glimpse through a half-open door, and this eating area that doubled as workspace when she ironed clothes on the table. How long have you been running the laundry? Elias asked, sopping up the last of his soup with a piece of bread. 3 years, since my husband died. Martha said it matter-of-factly, without emotion, the way you'd mention the weather. He was a freight driver. His wagon went off the road during a storm. By the time they found him, it was too late. I'm sorry. People always say that, as if sorry changes anything. She stood and collected their bowls. He left me with this building, $60 in debt, and a reputation for being his wife. I paid off the debt by turning the place into a laundry. The reputation took longer to shed. What kind of reputation? Martha paused at the wash basin, her back to him. James drank. When he drank, he got loud. When he got loud, people heard things. They assumed things about me, about our marriage, about why I stayed. She began washing the bowls with sharp, efficient movements. After he died, some people pitied me. Others blamed me. Said maybe if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have drunk so much. Wouldn't have been careless enough to drive in a storm. Elias heard the bitterness under her words. The weight of judgment carried for too long. That's not fair. Fair's got nothing to do with it. People need someone to blame when bad things happen. Makes them feel safer, like tragedy only strikes people who deserve it. She dried the bowls and put them away. But you know something about that, don't you? About people judging you for circumstances you can't control? I'm starting to get familiar with it, yeah. Martha turned to face him, leaning against the counter. The bandage on her forehead was already showing a small spot of red seeping through. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you really stay here? After what happened with Mrs. Pritchard, you could have gone back to Denver, tried somewhere else. Why stay in a town that rejected you before you even got started? Elias considered the question carefully. It was something he'd asked himself a dozen times in the middle of sleepless nights. Because I've been running for 3 years. Every time someone rejected me or made me feel like I wasn't good enough, I'd pack up and try somewhere new. Thought maybe the next town would be different, the next job would work out. But it never was, and it never did. So I figured maybe the problem wasn't finding the right place. Maybe it was learning to stand my ground and make people see me for what I can do, not what I can't. And how's that working out? Ask me again in 6 months. Martha smiled, just a slight curve at the corner of her mouth, but it was the first smile he'd seen from her. Fair enough. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Martha's expression shifted immediately, the brief warmth replaced by wariness. She crossed to the door and opened it just wide enough to see who was there. Mrs. Pritchard, she said, her voice carefully neutral. What can I do for you? Elias felt his chest tighten. He wheeled his chair back slightly, instinctively putting distance between himself and the door, between himself and the woman who'd publicly declared him insufficient. Adelaide Pritchard's voice carried clearly into the room. I'm picking up my laundry. Should have been ready yesterday. It'll be ready tomorrow. I told you that when you dropped it off. I need it tonight. I have guests arriving from Cheyenne in the morning. Then you should have brought it earlier in the week, like I suggested. Martha's tone remained even, but Elias could hear the steel underneath. I can't rush 3 loads of washing and ironing because your planning was poor. There was a pause, and Elias imagined the look on Adelaide Pritchard's face, the same expression she'd worn when she'd looked at him on the train platform. I'm not asking you to work miracles, Martha. I'm asking you to prioritize properly. Some customers are more important than others. All my customers are equally important. First come, first served. I could take my business elsewhere. You could, but Lloyd Hutchins charges twice what I do and burns holes in half the clothes he irons. Your choice. Another pause, longer this time, then tomorrow morning, first thing. It'll be ready by noon. That's the best I can do. The door closed, and Martha stood with her hand still on the knob for a moment before turning back. Her eyes found Elias, and he saw something flicker across her face. Concern, maybe, or embarrassment that he'd heard the exchange. That must be awkward for you, she said quietly. What? Doing business with her, knowing she's the one who… Martha gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Who rejected me? Who called me unfit? Elias shrugged. I don't do business with her. I do business with you. What she thinks about me doesn't change the fact that your ramp needed building. Martha studied him for a long moment. Most people would hold a grudge. I've got better things to do with my energy than hold grudges against people who don't matter to me. She matters in this town. Her ranch is one of the biggest in the territory. People listen to what she says. Then they'll hear her opinion of me and decide for themselves if she's right. I can't control that. I can only control the quality of my work and how I treat people. Elias wheeled toward the door. I should go. Let you get back to work. Elias, Martha's voice stopped him. Thank you. For earlier, for the doctor. You already thanked me. I know, but I meant it. He nodded and wheeled out into the cold evening, making his way back to Mrs. Chen's boarding house through streets that were quieter now, most people having retreated indoors against the deepening cold. But the exchange with Adelaide Pritchard lingered in his mind, not because her words had hurt, they hadn't particularly, but because of what they revealed about how this town worked. Power, reputation, the weight of social standing, all the invisible forces that determined who mattered and who didn't. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Elias worked at Tom's smithy each morning, took on repair jobs each afternoon, and tried to save what little money he could. Tom had started paying him $10 a week now, and the side work brought in another $3 to $5, depending on what needed doing. It was enough to pay Mrs. Chen, buy food, and set aside a small amount for tools. He saw Martha regularly, though not always by design. Sometimes he'd repair something at her laundry, a broken wash tub, a door that wouldn't latch properly, shelving that had started to sag under the weight of soap and supplies. Other times their paths would just cross naturally, and they'd stop to talk for a few minutes before moving on to their respective work. The town was slowly adjusting to his presence. Some people, like Tom and Mei Chen, and the school teacher who'd hired him to build bookshelves, treated him like anyone else. Others, like Lloyd Hutchins and a few of his friends, made it clear they thought Elias was a problem that should solve itself by leaving. Most people fell somewhere in between, not hostile, but not exactly welcoming either. They watched, waited, formed opinions slowly. Then came the day in early March when everything changed. Elias had been working at the smithy when Daniel burst through the door, out of breath and wild-eyed. "Tom, you seen Martha Hale this morning?" Tom looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping. "No, why?" "Lloyd Hutchins is telling people she owes him money, says she's been running her laundry without paying for supplies, that she's cheated him out of near $40. He's got the sheriff looking into it." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's not possible. Martha pays for everything up front. I've seen her do it." "I'm just telling you what Lloyd's saying. He's making a big production of it at the general store, showing people his ledger, pointing to numbers." Daniel looked between Tom and Elias. Says if she can't pay by end of business today, he's taking it to the territorial court. Tom set down his hammer with a careful deliberateness that suggested he was working very hard to stay calm. Lloyd Hutchins is a lying snake who can't stand that Martha refused to do his laundry anymore after he tried to touch her last summer. "What?" Elias's hands tightened on his wheels. "She never told you. Lloyd got drunk at the harvest dance and cornered Martha outside. Put his hands on her, said things no man should say to any woman. She slapped him hard enough to leave a mark for a week." Tom's jaw was tight. "He's been looking for a way to hurt her ever since." Elias was already moving toward the door. "Where is she?" "Probably at her laundry." "But Elias—" He didn't wait to hear the rest. He wheeled out of the smithy and down the street as fast as his arms could propel him. The wheels of his chair rattled over the frozen ruts in the road, and more than once he hit a rough patch that nearly threw him sideways. But he kept moving, driven by an anger that surprised him with its intensity. Martha's laundry was closed when he arrived, the windows dark despite it being mid-morning. He pounded on the door. "Martha, it's Elias, open up." No response. He wheeled around to the back and found her sitting on the steps of the back porch, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard him approach, and he could see she'd been crying. Not the dramatic tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who'd simply run out of ways to fight. "He's going to take everything," she said. Her voice was flat, defeated. Lloyd showed the sheriff his ledger. "Has entries for supplies I supposedly bought on credit. Dates, amounts, my signature on the account. Except I never bought anything on credit. I always pay cash. Always." Elias wheeled closer. "Did you tell the sheriff that?" "Of course I did, but it's my word against Lloyd's ledger. And Lloyd's a respected businessman with a store and a clean reputation. I'm just the widow who does laundry." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The sheriff said if I can't prove I paid, if I can't produce receipts, then the ledger stands as evidence of debt." "Where are your receipts?" "I don't have them. Lloyd never gave me receipts. Said they weren't necessary for cash transactions, that he'd just mark it paid in his ledger." Martha pressed her palms against her eyes. "I was stupid. I should have demanded receipts. Should have known better than to trust him." "This isn't your fault, isn't it? I'm the one who believed people were basically decent. I'm the one who thought paying fairly and working hard would be enough." She lowered her hands and looked at Elias with an expression that was equal parts anger and despair. "You were right to stay and fight, but fighting only works if the game isn't rigged against you from the start." Elias sat with that for a moment. feeling the weight of her words. She was right, in a way. The game was rigged. It had been rigged against him since the moment he'd rolled off that train, and it had been rigged against her long before that. People like Lloyd made the rules, and people like them were expected to just accept whatever judgment was handed down. But accepting it felt like drowning, and Elias had already decided he wasn't going to drown. "Where does Lloyd keep his ledger at night?" he asked. Martha looked at him sharply. "Why?" "Just answer the question." "In his store, I suppose, in the office in the back. But Elias, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm not thinking anything yet. I'm just gathering information." He turned his chair toward the street. "Stay here. Don't talk to Lloyd, don't talk to the sheriff. I'll be back." Elias! But he was already moving, wheeling back toward the main street with a plan forming in his mind that was probably foolish and definitely risky, but felt like the only option left. He found Tom Birch at the smithy, told him what he needed, and watched Tom's expression shift from concerned to determined. "You sure about this?" Tom asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "All right then. Give me an hour." Elias spent that hour at Mrs. Chen's shop, talking to May about receipts and business practices and whether there was any legal requirement for shopkeepers to provide proof of payment. May listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and then disappeared into the back room. She returned with her mother. Mrs. Chen looked at Elias with her sharp, evaluating gaze. "Martha Hale is a good woman, works hard, pays her debts, bothers nobody. Lloyd Hutchins is a pig who cheats and lies and thinks his American face makes him better than everyone." She crossed her arms. "You plan to help Martha?" "I plan to try." "How?" "Better you don't know the details. But I need to know something. When Martha buys soap and supplies from you, do you give her receipts?" "Always. I give receipts to everyone. Learned early that in this country, if you don't have paper proof, people say you're lying." Mrs. Chen's eyes narrowed. "You think Martha lost her receipts?" "I think Lloyd never gave her any, and I think if we can prove a pattern of him not providing receipts to customers, it might cast doubt on his ledger." Mrs. Chen and May exchanged a look that seemed to communicate an entire conversation without words. Then May went into the back room again and returned with a wooden box. "Customer receipts," she said. "Going back 3 years, organized by name and date. If you need to show that Lloyd Hutchins doesn't give receipts while other businesses do, this might help." Elias took the box carefully. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Mrs. Chen said. "And whatever you're planning, be careful. Lloyd has friends, men who think the same way he does. They won't like you making trouble for him." By late afternoon, Elias had gathered what he needed and returned to Martha's laundry. She was working now, scrubbing clothes in the big wash tubs with a mechanical intensity that suggested she was trying to drown her troubles in hot water and soap. She looked up when he wheeled in, and her eyes went immediately to the box he carried. "What's that?" "Receipts, 3 years' worth from Chen's shop. Proof that honest businesses give receipts for cash transactions." He set the box on her work table. "Also, Tom Birch is willing to testify that you always pay him in cash for any metalwork repairs, and that he always provides receipts. The school teacher says the same. So does Dr. Kim." Martha stared at him. "You've been talking to people about this. About me?" "I've been gathering evidence that Lloyd Hutchins is a liar who's trying to cheat you. There's a difference." "Elias, you don't understand. This isn't just about receipts. This is about Lloyd wanting to punish me for rejecting him. He won't stop just because a few people say nice things about me." "Then we make it about more than just nice things. We make it about documentation, patterns, evidence that his ledger can't be trusted." Elias wheeled closer. "Martha, you told me fighting only works if the game isn't rigged. But sometimes the game is rigged and you have to fight anyway, because the alternative is letting people like Lloyd decide your worth." She studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her working through it, the risk, the potential consequences, the question of whether fighting was worth the cost. "What do you need me to do?" she asked finally. "I need you to let me help, and I need you to trust me." The next morning, Elias wheeled into Lloyd Hutchins' general store with Martha beside him and Tom Birch following behind. The store was busy, 6 customers browsing shelves, Lloyd's wife working the counter, while Lloyd himself stood near the back, holding court with 2 other men. Lloyd saw them immediately, and his expression shifted from surprise to something uglier. "Well, well, the cripple and the widow. Come to beg for mercy?" Elias kept his voice level and loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "We came to discuss your ledger, Lloyd. Specifically, the entries you claim represent money Martha owes you." "Nothing to discuss. The ledger's clear. She bought on credit. She didn't pay. She owes me $38.50. "Interesting, because Martha says she always paid cash and you never gave her receipts." "Her memory must be faulty." "Happens a lot with women." Lloyd's two friends chuckled appreciatively. "Does it happen with men too? Because Tom here says you've never given him receipts either. Neither has Chen's shop, or the doctor, or the school teacher." Elias pulled out a stack of papers from the bag hanging on his chair. "In fact, we've talked to 24 of your customers, and not one of them can produce a receipt from your store." The chuckling stopped. Lloyd's expression went carefully blank. "I don't give receipts for cash transactions. No need when the money's exchanged right there." "But you do require receipts when customers claim they paid you, don't you? That's what you told the sheriff yesterday. That without receipts, Martha can't prove she paid." Elias looked around at the other customers, making sure they were all listening. "Seems like a convenient policy. You don't give receipts, then you claim people owe you money, and they can't prove otherwise." "That's a serious accusation, boy." Lloyd took a step forward. "You better be careful what you're saying. I'm saying your ledger isn't proof of anything except what you wrote in it. And since you've admitted you don't give receipts, there's no way to verify your entries are accurate." "The sheriff accepted my ledger as evidence." "Did the sheriff know about your policy of not giving receipts? Did he know that Martha's not the first person you've claimed owes you money without documentation?" Elias pulled out another paper. "Because we found 3 other cases in the past 5 years where you've taken people to court for debt, and in all 3 cases you couldn't produce any proof beyond your ledger entries." That wasn't entirely true. Elias had found 2 such cases, and one of them had been settled out of court, so it was unclear what evidence existed. But Lloyd didn't know that, and the bluff landed with enough force that Lloyd's face went red. "You've been digging into my business?" "I've been documenting a pattern of fraudulent bookkeeping. There's a difference." The store had gone completely quiet now. Every customer was watching, and Lloyd's wife had stopped even pretending to work. Lloyd looked around at the audience, seemed to realize he was losing ground, and changed tactics. "Even if all that's true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't change the fact that she owes me money. The ledger shows—" "Your ledger shows whatever you want it to show," Martha cut in. Her voice was steady now, no trace of the defeated woman from yesterday. "Just like it probably shows whatever you need it to show to keep your books balanced when you skim money from your own till." Lloyd's face went from red to purple. "You'll regret that accusation." "Will I? Because I'm thinking maybe the territorial auditor would be interested in examining your books. All of them. Not just the ledger you keep for show, but the real accounting you do when nobody's watching." Martha stepped forward, and Elias saw Lloyd actually take a step back. "You made a mistake, Lloyd. You picked on me thinking I'd be too scared or too weak to fight back. But you forgot that laundry work means people talk around me. And I've heard things. About your business practices. About money that doesn't add up. About customers who've complained but were too afraid to make a formal report. Those are lies. Then you won't mind an audit proving it." Tom Birch's voice cut through Lloyd's protest. "I'm sure the territorial office would be happy to send someone. Might take a few weeks, might tie up your business for a month or 2 while they go through every transaction, but if you've got nothing to hide, shouldn't be a problem." Lloyd stood there, trapped by his own lies and the public audience that had witnessed the entire exchange. Elias could see him calculating, trying to find a way out that didn't involve admitting he'd fabricated the debt. "Or," Elias said quietly, "you could admit your ledger was in error, that you made a mistake in your bookkeeping, that Martha doesn't actually owe you anything." The silence stretched out for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Lloyd cleared his throat. "Might have made an error," he muttered. "Books get complicated. Easy to mark something wrong." "So Martha doesn't owe you money?" "I'll have to review my records more carefully, but in the meantime, I'm willing to suspend collection efforts pending further review." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really an admission, but it was enough. Elias saw it in the faces of the customers, in the way they looked at Lloyd with new suspicion, in the whispers that started even before the three of them left the store. Outside, Martha stopped on the boardwalk and turned to face Elias. For a moment, she just looked at him, and he couldn't read her expression. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "Because you helped me when I needed it. Because Lloyd's a bully who needed to be stood up to. Because it was the right thing to do." Elias paused. "Pick whichever reason you like best." Martha laughed, a real laugh this time, with genuine warmth in it. "Thank you, Elias, for everything." "You're welcome." Tom clapped Elias on the shoulder. "That was something, the look on Lloyd's face when you brought up the audit." He grinned. "You know he's going to hate you even more now, right?" "He already hated me. At least now I gave him a good reason." They parted ways then, Tom back to his smithy, Martha to her laundry, Elias toward the boarding house. But as Elias wheeled down the street, he noticed something different. People were looking at him, yes, but not the way they had before. There was less pity, less dismissal. Some of the looks were curious, some were respectful, and a few were even approving. He'd made waves, just like Tom had predicted, but this time the waves were pushing him forward instead of pulling him under. That evening, there was a knock on his door at the boarding house. When he opened it, Martha stood there with a basket covered in cloth. "I made stew," she said. "Too much for one person. Thought maybe you'd help me with it." They ate together at his small table, talking about everything and nothing. Her plans to expand the laundry, his designs for new tools, the way the town was changing as more people moved in from the east. It was comfortable, easy, the kind of conversation that happened between people who'd earned each other's trust. As she was leaving, Martha paused at the door. "What you said in Lloyd's store about me helping you when you needed it, I never thought about it that way. I just gave you work because you could do it." "I know, that's what made it matter." She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for more words. Then she smiled, that same slight curve at the corner of her mouth that was becoming familiar, and left. Elias sat alone in his room after she'd gone, feeling something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, though there was some of that. More like the recognition that he'd found something in this frozen frontier town that he hadn't found in 3 years of searching elsewhere. He'd found people who saw him for what he could do instead of what he couldn't. He'd found work that mattered, and a place that was starting to feel less like exile and more like home. And he'd found Martha, quiet, strong Martha, who fought her own battles but didn't mind having someone fight alongside her sometimes. Outside his window, the March snow was starting to melt, revealing the brown earth underneath. Winter was ending, spring was coming, and Elias Crow was still standing his ground. Or rather, he was sitting his ground. But the distinction mattered less and less with every day that passed. Spring came to Red Willow with mud and promise. The snow melted in uneven patches, leaving the streets a treacherous mix of frozen ruts and standing water. Elias's wheelchair became caked with mud daily, and he spent his evenings cleaning the mechanisms and oiling the wheels to keep them turning smoothly. It was tedious work, but necessary. Everything in his life now depended on those wheels keeping him mobile, keeping him working, keeping him moving forward. The confrontation with Lloyd Hutchins had shifted something in the town's perception of him. Word had spread quickly about how he'd stood up for Martha, about the evidence he'd gathered, about the way he'd backed Lloyd into a corner, using nothing but facts and witnesses. People who'd previously avoided eye contact now nodded when they passed him on the street. The schoolteacher hired him to build desks for the expanding classroom. A rancher came into Tom's smithy specifically to ask if Elias could repair a complex irrigation pump that nobody else could figure out. But not everyone was pleased with Elias's growing acceptance. Lloyd still glared at him whenever their paths crossed, and Adelaide Pritchard had taken to giving him looks of pure disdain when she came to town. Her ranch hand, a surly man named Carson, who seemed to serve as her enforcer, had made a point of blocking Elias's path one day, forcing him to wheel around through ankle-deep mud rather than use the boardwalk. "Don't get too comfortable," Carson had said. "This town's got a way of correcting mistakes." Elias had kept moving without responding, but the threat lingered in his mind like smoke. He mentioned it to Tom the next day while they worked on a complicated gear assembly for a sawmill. "Carson's all bluster," Tom said. though his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe his own words. Adelaide keeps him around to intimidate people, but he's never actually done anything violent. There's a first time for everything. True enough. But you've got friends now, people who'd notice if something happened to you. Tom fitted a gear into place with a precise tap of his hammer. That matters more than you might think in a town like this. What mattered even more, Elias was discovering, was Martha. Their friendship had deepened over the past weeks into something he couldn't quite name, but felt in his chest every time he saw her. They ate together several times a week now, trading meals back and forth between her laundry and his boarding house room. They talked about their pasts, her difficult marriage, his mine accident, the ways they'd both been shaped by loss and rejection. They talked about their futures too, though those conversations were more careful, more tentative, as if speaking dreams aloud might cause them to evaporate. One evening in late March, Martha showed up at his door with flour on her hands and frustration in her eyes. "I need help," she said without preamble. "The big wash tub at the laundry cracked, water's leaking everywhere, and I've got 3 loads that need washing by tomorrow morning." Elias grabbed his tools and followed her through the muddy streets to the laundry. The damage was worse than she'd described, a crack running nearly 2 feet along the bottom of the cast iron tub, water pooling on the floor despite her efforts to contain it with rags and buckets. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Elias examined the crack carefully, running his fingers along the jagged edges. Cast iron was tricky to repair, especially something that held water. A simple patch wouldn't hold under the pressure and temperature changes. He'd need to do it properly or not at all. "I can fix it, but not tonight. I'll need to get supplies from Tom's smithy. Probably take me most of tomorrow to do it right." Martha's shoulders sagged. "I can't afford to lose a day of work, not with the orders I've got backed up." "Then we work around it. You've got that smaller tub in the back room, right? Use that for tomorrow's loads. It'll take longer, but you'll get them done. I'll start on the repair tomorrow afternoon after my shift with Tom. Work into the evening if I need to." "Elias, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He met her eyes. "We help each other. That's what we do." Something flickered across her face, gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made his heart beat faster. But she just nodded and helped him clean up the water before it could damage the wooden floor. The next day, Elias came to the laundry after finishing at the smithy, carrying the materials he needed: metal patches cut from scrap iron, a special cement compound Tom had mixed for him, and tools for grinding and shaping. The work was delicate and demanding. He had to drain the tub completely, grind down the edges of the crack to create a clean surface, apply the patches with the cement compound, then let it cure overnight before it could be used. Martha worked around him, washing clothes in the smaller tub, hanging lines of laundry across every available space. The building filled with steam and the smell of soap, and Elias found himself strangely content despite the difficult work. There was something peaceful about laboring side by side with someone. No words necessary, just the shared purpose of getting things done. It was well past dark when he finally finished the repair. Martha had stopped working an hour earlier and made coffee, which she handed him as he sat back to examine his work. "Will it hold?" she asked. "It should. Won't know for sure until we fill it and let it heat up, but I reinforced it beyond what's probably necessary. Better too strong than too weak." They tested it together the next morning, filling the tub slowly and watching for any signs of leakage. The repair held perfectly. Martha ran her hand along the patched section with something like wonder. "It's better than new," she said. "It's stronger where it broke. That's how repairs work sometimes. The broken place becomes the strongest part." Martha looked at him then with an intensity that made him suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the quiet intimacy of the moment. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it and looked away. "I should start on those loads," she said. "Thank you, Elias, for everything." But as he wheeled toward the door, her voice stopped him. "Elias, wait. There's something I need to tell you." He turned back. She was still standing by the wash tub, her hands twisting together nervously. "Lloyd came by yesterday," she said, "while you were at Tom's smithy. He made me an offer." Elias felt his chest tighten. "What kind of offer?" "He said he'd forget about the supposed debt, stop spreading rumors about my business, even send customers my way. All I had to do was tell people that you'd been inappropriate with me. That you'd made advances, taken liberties, made me uncomfortable. The words hit him like a physical blow. And what did you say? I told him to get out of my laundry before I threw him out. Martha's voice was fierce now, angry. But Elias, this is what I mean about the game being rigged. Lloyd can't beat you straight on, so he's trying to destroy your reputation by attacking your character. And in this town, that kind of accusation against a woman, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. The stain stays. He wants to turn people against me by making them think I'm a threat to you. More than that, he wants to isolate you, make it so people won't work with you, won't trust you, won't defend you when he comes after you again. Martha moved closer, her expression urgent. You need to be careful. Maybe we shouldn't be seen together so much, just until this blows over. No. The word came out harder than he intended. No. I'm not going to let Lloyd dictate who I can be friends with. That's exactly what he wants, to make me shrink away, to prove that I don't belong here. But if people start talking, let them talk. Anyone who knows us will know the truth. Anyone who doesn't know us will believe whatever they want, regardless of what we do. Elias wheeled closer to her. Martha, I'm not going to abandon our friendship because Lloyd Hutchins is a vindictive coward, and I hope you won't either. She studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her working through it. The risk, the potential damage, the question of whether their friendship was worth the trouble it might cause. Then her expression softened into something resolute. I won't, she said quietly. I'm tired of letting men like Lloyd control my life through fear and threats. I'm tired of being careful and small and invisible. She took a breath. So no, I won't stop being your friend, and I won't apologize for it to anyone. They stood there in the morning light filtering through the laundry windows, and Elias felt something settle into place between them, an understanding, a commitment, a line drawn in the mud that spring was making of everything. But Lloyd wasn't finished. 2 days later, Elias was working at Tom's smithy when Daniel burst in, breathing hard. Elias, you need to come quick. There's trouble at Martha's laundry. They found a crowd gathered in the street outside the laundry building, and through the cluster of people, Elias could see smoke rising from somewhere behind the structure. He wheeled forward as fast as his arms could move, people parting reluctantly to let him through. The laundry's back porch, the one he'd built the ramp for months ago, was engulfed in flames. Martha stood in her yard with a bucket, throwing water at the fire with desperate determination, but it was clear the blaze was beyond what one person with a bucket could manage. Martha! Elias wheeled toward her, but Tom grabbed the back of his chair. Fire brigade's coming. Let them handle it. That'll take too long. The whole building could go up. Elias could see the flames reaching toward the main structure, could see how close they were to catching on the dry wood of the laundry walls. We need to contain it now. He wheeled to the water pump in Martha's yard, positioned himself at the handle, and began pumping with all his strength. His shoulders screamed in protest, but he kept going, filling bucket after bucket that people in the crowd, shamed into action by his efforts, began passing forward to throw on the flames. More people joined in, forming a chain from the pump to the fire. Tom took over the pumping when Elias's arms finally gave out, and Elias wheeled as close to the fire as he dared, directing people where to throw the water for maximum effect. The smoke was thick and acrid, burning his eyes and throat, but he kept shouting instructions, kept coordinating the effort. By the time the fire brigade arrived with their hand pump wagon, the blaze was mostly contained, though the porch was destroyed and the back wall of the laundry was badly scorched. The brigade finished the job, soaking everything thoroughly to prevent rekindling, and then their captain, a gruff man named Sullivan, began examining the scene. How'd this start? He asked Martha. I don't know. I was working inside when I smelled smoke. Came out and found the porch on fire. Sullivan bent down near what was left of the porch steps, examining something. When he stood, he was holding a broken glass bottle with a piece of cloth still stuffed in the neck. This didn't start by accident, he said grimly. This was arson. The word sent a ripple through the crowd that had stayed to watch. Martha's face went pale. Who would do this? She asked, though Elias could see in her eyes that she already knew the answer. That's what Sheriff Morrison will need to determine. Sullivan looked at the bottle again. But whoever did it, they meant to burn your whole building down. Only reason they didn't succeed is this porch was mostly wet from yesterday's rain, slowed the fire down enough for people to stop it. The sheriff arrived and took statements, examined the evidence, made notes in his book. But Elias could see the calculation in his eyes, the unwillingness to jump to conclusions, the careful neutrality that came from not wanting to accuse prominent citizens without ironclad proof. "Could have been anyone," the sheriff said finally. "Drifters, troublemakers, someone with a grudge. I'll investigate, Mrs. Hale, but without witnesses, it's hard to say what happened here." "It was Lloyd Hutchins," Elias said clearly, "or someone acting on his behalf." The crowd went silent. The sheriff turned to look at him with an expression that suggested he'd been expecting this. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Crow. You got proof?" "Lloyd threatened Martha 2 days ago, tried to coerce her into lying about me. When she refused, he said she'd regret it. Now her laundry's been set on fire. That's not coincidence. That's not proof either. Lloyd Hutchins has an alibi. He was in his store all evening with witnesses. Then he paid someone to do it. Carson, probably. Adelaide Pritchard's ranch hand. He threatened me last week, said the town had ways of correcting mistakes. Carson was at the ranch last night. Mrs. Pritchard confirmed it." The sheriff closed his notebook with a snap. "Look, I understand you're upset. But accusations without evidence don't help anyone. I'll investigate properly, talk to people, see what I can find. But you need to let the law handle this." The sheriff left, and slowly the crowd dispersed, leaving Elias and Martha standing in the yard with Tom and a few others. The destruction of the porch looked even worse now that the smoke had cleared. Charred wood, twisted metal, Elias's carefully built ramp reduced to ash and nails. "This is because of me," Elias said quietly. "Because Lloyd can't get at me directly, so he's going after you." "This is because of Lloyd," Martha corrected, her voice hard. "Because he's a petty, vicious man who can't stand being challenged. Don't you dare take responsibility for his actions." "But if we hadn't stood up to him, then he would have taken everything I had through lies and threats, and I'd be working in some other town, starting over with nothing." Martha looked at the burned porch, then back at Elias. "I'd rather fight and lose than surrender without trying. You taught me that." Tom cleared his throat. "What you need right now is repairs. I can get lumber from the mill. Daniel, round up some of the boys and see who's willing to help rebuild. We can have a new porch up by the end of the week if we work together." True to his word, Tom organized a work party. Over the next 4 days, 6 men showed up at various times to help rebuild Martha's porch. Some came because they respected her work ethic. Others came because they didn't like the idea of arson in their town. A few came simply because helping was the right thing to do. Elias worked alongside them all, designing a stronger porch than before, one with better fire resistance and structural integrity. He couldn't do the heavy lifting, couldn't climb ladders or work on the roof, but he could design, measure, cut precise angles, and direct the construction. His limitations didn't make him useless, they just meant he contributed differently. On the 3rd day of construction, Adelaide Pritchard rode by on her horse and stopped to watch. She sat there for a long moment, taking in the scene of men working together, of Elias directing the placement of support beams from his chair, of Martha moving among the workers with water and encouragement. "This town's going soft," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Wasting time rebuilding for someone too careless to prevent a fire in the first place." Martha set down the water bucket and walked over to Adelaide's horse. "If you have something to say to me, say it directly. I'm saying you should be more careful about the company you keep. That cripple you've attached yourself to is bringing trouble. First Lloyd's business gets attacked, now this. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire." "The only smoke I see is from the arson someone committed against my property," Martha said evenly. "And the only trouble I see is from people who think they can intimidate others into submission." Adelaide's eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever standing up to Lloyd, making friends with the town cripple, but you're just making yourself a target. And when the next disaster comes, and it will, don't expect sympathy from people who warned you." She rode off without waiting for a response, leaving a tension in the air that took several minutes to dissipate. One of the workers, a young carpenter named Sam, shook his head. "She's got nerve. I'll give her that. Coming here to threaten you on your own property." "She didn't threaten," Martha said quietly. "She warned. There's a difference. And she's probably right. There will be more trouble. Lloyd and Adelaide and people like them don't give up just because they lose one round. So what do you do? Sam asked. Martha looked at Elias, at Tom, at the partially rebuilt porch that was rising from the ashes of the old one. We keep building. What else is there? By the end of the week, the new porch was complete. It was stronger than the original, with a ramp that had a gentler slope and better support. The workers had even added a small roof overhang to protect the entrance from rain and snow. It was objectively a better structure than what had been there before. On the evening they finished, Martha insisted on feeding everyone who'd helped. She'd made a massive pot of stew and borrowed enough bowls and spoons to serve a small army. They ate in her yard as the spring sun set, tired and satisfied and bonded by the shared work. After everyone else had left, Elias stayed to help Martha clean up. They washed dishes in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. "Thank you," Martha said finally, "for everything. For standing up to Lloyd, for organizing the repairs, for not running away when things got dangerous." "I'm not going anywhere," Elias said. "Not until you tell me to leave." "Then you're going to be here a long time." They looked at each other across the kitchen, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of what they'd become to each other, of the bond that had formed through shared struggle and mutual support. It wasn't romance, not quite. Though Elias suspected it was moving in that direction, it was something deeper, more fundamental. It was recognition. The next morning, Elias was at Tom's smithy when a commotion erupted in the street. Through the open door, he could see people running toward the center of town, shouting about fire. His blood went cold. "Not again," he breathed. But Tom was already moving toward the door, and what he saw made him stop dead. "It's not Martha's place. It's Lloyd's store." They joined the crowd gathering in front of the general store where smoke was pouring from the back windows. The fire brigade was already there, but the blaze was fierce, clearly having burned unnoticed for some time before being discovered. Lloyd stood in the street in his nightclothes. He lived above his store, watching his business burn with an expression of shock and rage. "Elias Crow did this!" Lloyd shouted suddenly, pointing at where Elias sat in his chair at the edge of the crowd. "That cripple burned down my store for revenge." The accusation sent a ripple through the crowd. People turned to look at Elias, and he could see the calculation in their eyes, the question of whether it might be true, whether the man they'd helped might be capable of arson. "I was at Mrs. Chen's boarding house all night," Elias said loudly, clearly. "Ask anyone there, ask Mrs. Chen, ask Daniel, ask the other boarders. I haven't left the building since dinner." "Convenient alibi," Lloyd snarled. "Or maybe you paid someone to do it, same as you accused me of doing. Mr. Hutchins." Sheriff Morrison cut in, his voice weary. "We need to focus on putting out this fire, not throwing accusations around. There'll be time for investigation after." The fire brigade managed to save the structure, but the interior was gutted. Lloyd's entire inventory, his ledgers, his carefully constructed business, all destroyed. As the smoke cleared and the damage became visible, Lloyd stood there staring at the ruins with tears running down his face. Elias should have felt satisfaction. This was justice, in a way. Lloyd had tried to destroy Martha's livelihood, and now his own was destroyed. But watching a man lose everything, even a man like Lloyd, brought no pleasure. It just felt like more tragedy in a town that had already seen too much. "This wasn't me," Elias said to the sheriff, "and I don't think it was revenge. I think someone's trying to pit us against each other, trying to create chaos. Or maybe," the sheriff said quietly, "someone's trying to prove a point about how easy it is to destroy what people build, about how we're all vulnerable." The sheriff's words stayed with Elias for days. The investigation into Lloyd's fire went nowhere, just like the investigation into Martha's arson. No witnesses, no evidence beyond the obvious fact that both fires had been deliberately set. Lloyd continued to insist Elias was responsible, but without proof, the accusation was just noise. What troubled Elias more was the pattern. 2 arsons in less than a week, both targeting people on opposite sides of a conflict. It felt orchestrated, purposeful, like someone was conducting an experiment to see how much chaos they could create. He was thinking about this one evening as he worked on a new design for a fire-resistant storage shed, something he could build for Martha to protect her supplies, when there was a frantic pounding on his door. "Elias!" It was Daniel, breathing hard. "There's been an accident at the old laundry shack on 2nd Street. A child's trapped inside and the building's unstable. They need help getting him out, but nobody can reach him. The floor's half collapsed and won't support anyone's weight." Elias grabbed his tools and wheeled after Daniel as fast as he could move. His mind was already calculating weight distribution, structural stress, ways to reach someone in a space too unstable for rescue. When they arrived, he found a crowd gathered around the old abandoned building that had once served as Red Willow's laundry before Martha opened her place. The structure was decrepit, half the roof caved in, and through a gap in the wall, Elias could see a boy of maybe 8 years old standing on a section of floor that was clearly ready to give way. "We called to him to stay still," one of the men explained. "But if that floor goes, he'll fall into the basement. It's a 12-foot drop onto broken beams and debris." "Why isn't someone in there getting him?" "Floor won't hold adult weight. Every time someone tries to cross, it starts to give. Kid's light enough that he's not breaking through, but anyone heavier will bring the whole thing down." Elias studied the situation, the sagging floor, the boy's frightened face, the precarious nature of the entire structure. An idea was forming, something crazy but possibly workable. "I can get to him," he said. "You? No offense, but I'm lighter than most of you because I'm sitting. Less weight per square foot if I distribute it right, and my chair's wheels will spread the load across multiple floor joists instead of concentrating it in one spot." Elias was already wheeling toward the entrance. "I need rope, 2 boards at least 8 feet long, and someone who can spot me from the doorway." Tom appeared at his elbow. "I'll spot you, and I'll tie the rope around your chair so if the floor gives, we can pull you back." They worked quickly, rigging the rope, positioning the boards to create a path that would distribute weight even further. Elias wheeled to the entrance of the building, looked at the terrified child across the unstable floor, and made a decision. He was either going to save this boy or die trying. There wasn't room for any other outcome. The rope went taut around Elias's chest as Tom secured it with a knot that would hold even if the entire floor collapsed beneath them. Elias tested the tension once, twice, then rolled forward onto the first board they'd laid across the entrance. The wood creaked but held. Behind him, he could hear the crowd holding its collective breath. "What's your name?" Elias called to the boy. "Tommy." The child's voice was thin with fear. "Tommy, I'm Elias. I'm going to come get you, but you need to stay very still. Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, small for his age, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Elias recognized him vaguely, one of the kids who ran errands around town for pennies. Elias positioned his chair carefully, distributing his weight across the board. The floor beneath groaned ominously, but the board was doing its job, spreading the load across multiple joists. He wheeled forward 6 inches, stopped, listened. The building settled around him with the kind of creaks that suggested it was deciding whether to stand or fall. "Elias, that floor's about to go," Tom warned from the doorway. "Maybe we should—" "There's no maybe here, Tom. That boy comes out, or we both do." Elias moved forward another few inches. The boards he was traversing were the only things between him and a 12-foot drop into a basement full of broken timber and rusted metal. "Tommy, how did you get out there?" I was looking for bottles. Mr. Chen pays 2 cents for bottles. I thought maybe—" The boy's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to go so far. Then the floor started breaking and I got scared to move." "You did the right thing staying still. Just keep doing that a little longer." Elias was halfway across now. He could see the section where Tommy stood more clearly, a small island of intact floor surrounded by gaps and holes where the boards had rotted through or fallen into the basement below. The boy had gotten lucky, finding one of the few spots that could still support weight, but that luck was running out. Even as Elias watched, he saw the boards beneath Tommy shift slightly, saw dust and debris sift down into the darkness below. "We're running out of time," Elias called back to Tom. "I need to move faster." "You move faster, you'll break through." "Then I'll break through. Get ready to pull." Elias took a breath and wheeled forward more quickly, his arms pumping, his wheels rolling across the precarious boards with a sound like distant thunder. The floor screamed in protest, boards snapping somewhere to his left, but he kept moving, kept his momentum going, because stopping now would mean his weight settled in one place long enough to break through. He reached Tommy's island just as the section behind him gave way with a crash that sent splinters and dust exploding upward. The rope around his chest jerked tight as Tom and several other men grabbed it from the doorway, but Elias was already reaching for the boy. "Climb on," he ordered. "Behind me, arms around my neck. Quick!" Tommy didn't hesitate. The child scrambled onto the back of Elias's chair, his small arms wrapping around Elias's neck with desperate strength. The additional weight made the floor beneath them groan and sag, and Elias could feel the boards starting to give. "Hold on tight and don't let go no matter what happens," Elias said. Then he shouted to Tom, "Pull! Now!" The rope went taut again, and Tom and the others began hauling them backward. But the floor was collapsing faster now, boards giving way in a cascade of destruction that was spreading toward them like a wave. Elias could feel his wheels losing purchase as the surface beneath them disintegrated. Then the chair lurched sideways. One wheel had broken through a rotten board, and suddenly Elias was tilted at a 45-degree angle, Tommy's weight pulling them both toward the hole that was opening beneath them. The boy screamed and tightened his grip, nearly choking Elias. "Don't let go," Elias gasped. He could feel the chair sliding, could feel gravity winning its argument. The rope was the only thing holding them, and it was cutting into his ribs hard enough to make breathing difficult. "Tom, pull harder!" The rope jerked them backward violently. Elias's wheel popped free of the hole, but now they were being dragged across the disintegrating floor with no control, no way to steer, just hanging on and hoping the rope held and the rescuers were strong enough to pull them the 20 feet back to safety before the entire structure came down. Behind them, Elias heard the massive crack of a support beam giving way. The section where Tommy had been standing collapsed entirely, disappearing into the basement with a crash that shook the whole building. Dust exploded upward, filling the air with choking debris. Then they were through the doorway, wheels hitting solid ground, Tom and 6 other men stumbling backward from the effort of hauling them out. A heartbeat later, the entire front wall of the old laundry building collapsed inward with a roar like artillery fire, sending a cloud of dust and splinters exploding into the street. Elias sat there coughing, Tommy still clinging to his back, both of them covered in dust and debris. His ribs felt like they'd been hit with a hammer from the rope, and his shoulders were screaming from the exertion. But they were alive. They were both alive. Tom helped pry Tommy's arms from around Elias's neck. The boy's mother, a washerwoman Elias recognized from seeing her at Martha's place, rushed forward and swept Tommy into her arms, sobbing and scolding him in equal measure. "You could have died," she kept saying. "You could have died." "But he didn't," Tom said quietly, his hand on Elias's shoulder. "Because this man went in after him when nobody else could." The crowd that had gathered stood in stunned silence, looking at Elias with expressions that ranged from shock to admiration to something that might have been shame. He could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken them aloud. The man we called cripple, the man we dismissed as broken and useless, just risked his life to save a child none of us could reach. Adelaide Pritchard stood at the edge of the crowd, her face unreadable. She looked at Elias, at the collapsed building, at Tommy crying in his mother's arms. Then she turned and walked away without a word. But Lloyd Hutchins was there too, and he stepped forward with an expression that suggested he'd just been handed ammunition he couldn't wait to use. "Awful convenient," Lloyd said loudly. "The cripple happens to be the hero just when people were starting to think he might be responsible for the arsons. Makes you wonder if this whole thing was staged to make him look good." The crowd's mood shifted uncomfortably. Several people glanced at each other, and Elias could see Lloyd's accusation taking root despite its absurdity. "You think I arranged for a child to nearly die?" Elias asked, his voice dangerous. "You think I staged a building collapse? I think you're clever enough to take advantage of a situation. Kid gets himself stuck. You play hero. Suddenly everyone forgets about the fires." Lloyd crossed his arms. "Convenient timing is all I'm saying." "Oh, the only thing that's convenient," Martha's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "is that you're still trying to destroy Elias's reputation after he just saved a child's life." She pushed through the crowd to stand beside Elias's chair, her face flushed with anger and something fiercer. "I'm done being quiet about this. Done letting you poison this town with your lies and your petty revenge. You tried to extort me, failed, and then someone you probably paid, set fire to my laundry as punishment. When that didn't work, your own store burned down, and you blamed Elias without a shred of proof. Now a child nearly dies, and you're using it as another excuse to attack a man who's shown more courage and integrity in 3 months than you've shown in your entire life. You watch your mouth. Or what? You'll try to burn me out again? You'll spread more rumors? You've already done your worst, Lloyd, and I'm still standing. We're both still standing, and we're not going anywhere. Lloyd's face had gone purple with rage, but before he could respond, Tommy's mother stepped forward, still holding her son. "Mr. Crow saved my boy," she said firmly. "I don't care about arsons or rumors or town politics. I care that my Tommy's alive because a good man risked his life, and I won't stand here and listen to anyone suggest otherwise." "Neither will I," said Tom Birch. "Nor I," added Machen, who'd pushed through the crowd. "Same here," said the schoolteacher. One by one, people began speaking up. Not everyone, but enough. The carpenter who'd helped rebuild Martha's porch, the rancher whose irrigation pump Elias had fixed, Daniel from the boarding house. Even Dr. Kim, who rarely involved himself in town disputes, stepped forward to add his voice to the growing chorus of support. Lloyd looked around at the crowd turning against him and seemed to realize he'd overplayed his hand. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with impotent fury. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their business now that the excitement was over. But several stopped to thank Elias directly, to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. Tommy's mother pressed $2 into his palm despite his protests. "It's all I have," she said, "and it's not enough for what you did, but please take it." Elias accepted it because refusing seemed like it would hurt her more than taking it. As the street cleared, he found himself alone with Martha and Tom, the three of them looking at the ruins of the old laundry building that had nearly become his grave. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," Tom said finally. "Probably just stupid," Elias said. His ribs were aching fiercely now, and he could feel bruises forming where the rope had cut into his flesh. "But I couldn't just let him die." Martha knelt beside his chair, her hands finding his. "You could have died." "But I didn't." "You could have." Her voice was fierce. "The floor could have given way. The rope could have broken. The whole building could have collapsed on top of you. You could have died, Elias, and I would have—" She stopped abruptly, as if the words she was about to say were too big, too important to release into the open air without preparation. Elias turned his hand in hers, squeezing gently. "I'm here. I'm alive. That's what matters." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes bright with unshed tears and emotions he could only guess at. Then she stood abruptly, brushing dust from her skirt. "Come back to the laundry," she said. "You need those ribs looked at, and I'm not taking no for an answer." They made their way through the late afternoon streets, and Elias noticed something different in how people looked at him now. Not pity, not curiosity, not even just acceptance. Respect, hard-earned, undeniable respect. At the laundry, Martha insisted on examining the damage the rope had done to his ribs. The bruising was spectacular, dark purple bands that wrapped around his torso, but Dr. Kim, who'd followed them to check on Elias, confirmed nothing was broken. "You'll be sore for weeks," the doctor said, "but you'll heal. You were lucky." After Dr. Kim left, Martha made tea and they sat in her kitchen in silence for a while, both processing what had happened. Finally, Martha spoke. "When I saw you go into that building, when I heard it starting to collapse," she set down her teacup with shaking hands. "I realized something. I realized that I couldn't lose you, that somewhere along the way you'd become the most important person in my life, and the thought of you dying was unbearable." Elias set down his own cup carefully. "Martha, let me finish, please." She took a breath. "When James died, I told myself I was done with men, done with marriage, done with depending on anyone, done with risking my heart. I built walls around myself and decided I'd live alone and work hard, and that would be enough. And then you showed up in your chair with your tools and your determination, and you didn't ask me for anything except the chance to work. You didn't pity me or try to save me or act like I needed protecting. You just saw me, really saw me, as a person, as an equal, and slowly, without meaning to, I started to care about you, more than care about you. I care about you too, Elias said quietly. More than I thought I could care about anyone after the accident, after Sarah left, after 3 years of being told I wasn't enough. You're enough. Martha's voice was fierce. You're more than enough. You're brave and skilled and kind and stubborn and everything I didn't know I was looking for. And I want us to be more than friends. Elias felt something in his chest crack open, something that had been locked away since the mind collapse, since the moment he'd woken up in that hospital bed and realized his life would never be what he'd planned. He'd thought that part of him was dead, the part that could hope for love, for partnership, for a future with someone. But here was Martha offering him exactly that. Not despite his limitations, but including them. Not trying to fix him or change him, just accepting him as he was and asking if he wanted to build something together. Yes, he said. I want that too. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face, making her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with genuine joy. She reached across the table and took his hand, and they sat there in the quiet of her kitchen, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. The next few weeks brought changes to Red Willow that nobody had expected. Tommy's rescue had shifted something fundamental in how the town viewed Elias. The people who'd defended him before became more vocal in their support. Those who'd been uncertain moved firmly into his corner. Even some who'd sided with Lloyd began to reconsider their positions. Lloyd himself became increasingly isolated. His store reopened in a temporary location, but customers were scarce. People remembered his accusations, his attempts to destroy Martha's business, his vindictive behavior. Business dried up until Lloyd was barely scraping by. Adelaide Pritchard, on the other hand, surprised everyone. 2 weeks after Tommy's rescue, she appeared at Tom's smithy while Elias was working. "Mr. Crow," she said formally, "may I speak with you privately?" They went outside, away from curious ears. Adelaide stood very straight, her hands clasped in front of her, clearly struggling with whatever she'd come to say. "I was wrong about you," she said finally. "At the station, when I rejected you, I saw only your chair. I saw what you couldn't do and assumed that made you useless. I was wrong, and I apologize." Elias studied her face, looking for insincerity, but found only genuine regret. "I don't need you to apologize," he said, "but I appreciate it anyway. I have a proposition. My ranch needs someone who can handle machinery, repair equipment, design improvements to our irrigation system. The man I have now is adequate, but I need more than adequate. I'm offering you a position at twice what Tom pays you, plus housing on the ranch if you want it." It was a generous offer, more money than Elias had imagined making in a frontier town. It was also, clearly, Adelaide's way of trying to make amends for her initial rejection. But Elias found himself hesitating. "I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Pritchard, but I'm happy where I am. I've got work with Tom, side jobs around town, and I've started to build a life here in Red Willow proper. Because of Martha Hale. Partly, but also because I've learned something about myself these past months. I don't need the biggest job or the most money or even the most acceptance. I need to be somewhere I can do good work for people I respect, in a place where I'm valued for what I can do rather than judged for what I can't. I found that here." Adelaide nodded slowly. "I understand, but if you ever change your mind, the offer stands. And Mr. Crow, thank you for saving that boy. You showed this town what real strength looks like, including me." She left, and Elias wheeled back into the smithy where Tom was waiting with a questioning look. "She offer you a job?" Tom asked. "She did." "You taking it?" "No, I'm staying right here." Tom grinned. "Good, because I'd have to find someone else to argue with about proper gear ratios, and that would be a pain." That evening, Elias and Martha took a walk, or rather, Martha walked while Elias wheeled beside her, along the creek that ran through the edge of town. Spring had fully arrived now, the cottonwood trees leafing out in pale green, the grass coming back to life after the long winter. It was beautiful in a stark frontier way that Elias had come to appreciate. "Adelaide offered me a job," he told Martha. "Good money, position at her ranch." Martha's expression flickered with something that might have been worry. Are you considering it? No. I told her I was happy here. He paused. But I've been thinking about the future, about what I want to build. What do you want to build? A proper workshop. Somewhere I can take on bigger projects, design and create things beyond just repairs. I've saved almost $60 now. It's not enough to buy land and build a structure, but it's a start. He glanced at her. I was thinking maybe somewhere near your laundry, if you didn't mind the noise. Martha stopped walking and turned to face him. Elias Crow, are you asking if you can build a workshop next to my property? I'm asking if you'd want me as a neighbor, long term. I'd want you as more than a neighbor. She knelt beside his chair so they were at eye level. I told you I cared about you, but I didn't say everything I meant. I love you, Elias. I love your stubborn determination and your clever mind and the way you refuse to let this town or anyone in it make you feel less than whole. I love that you see me as an equal and a partner. I love that you're willing to fight for me, but you don't think I need saving. I love you. And if you're planning to build a workshop near my laundry, I'd rather you just build it as part of my property. Our property. Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion. Martha, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. The details we can figure out, but yes, eventually, I want to marry you. If you'll have me. If I'll have you, Elias laughed, a sound of pure joy. Martha, you're the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years, maybe in my whole life. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build my workshop on your property. Yes to all of it. She kissed him then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. People are going to talk, Martha said, about us getting married, about the mail-order husband who got rejected by one woman and ended up with another. Let them talk. We've given them plenty to talk about already. They made their plans over the following weeks. Elias would continue working with Tom while designing his workshop, which would be built onto the back of Martha's laundry property. They'd marry in June, a simple ceremony with just their friends present. No church wedding. Neither of them felt the need for formality or religious blessing, just a legal marriage and a commitment made in front of the people who mattered to them. The design for the workshop became Elias's evening project. He drew up plans for a structure that would be completely accessible, with wide doorways, smooth floors, and workbenches at the perfect height for someone in a chair. He showed the plans to Tom, who made suggestions. He showed them to Martha, who pointed out places where she could see their two businesses working together, her laundry providing steady income while his workshop grew. In May, they broke ground on the workshop. Tom and his crew did the heavy construction while Elias directed and handled the precision work. The building rose quickly, taking shape in a way that felt almost miraculous to Elias. His own space, designed by him for him, built on property he'd share with someone who loved him. Lloyd Hutchins left town in early June. His temporary store failed, his reputation was destroyed, and he'd run out of people willing to do business with him. He loaded his remaining possessions into a wagon and drove out of Red Willow without saying goodbye to anyone. Some people said good riddance. Others felt sorry for him despite everything. Elias felt mostly relief that the conflict was finally over. The workshop was completed 2 days before the wedding. Elias wheeled through the space, running his hands over the smooth workbenches, testing the accessibility of every corner and cabinet. It was perfect, not because it was fancy or expensive, but because it was exactly what he needed it to be. On a warm June morning, Elias and Martha stood beneath the cottonwood trees near the creek where they'd had so many conversations. Tom Birch stood up as witness, along with Mei Chen and Daniel and a dozen other friends who'd gathered to celebrate. There was no priest or preacher, just the territorial judge who'd ridden in from Cheyenne to make it legal. Do you, Elias Crow, take Martha Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Martha Hale, take Elias Crow to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. They kissed while their friends cheered, and Elias felt something settle deep in his chest, a sense of rightness, of having finally found where he belonged, not despite his limitations, not in spite of his chair, but as himself, fully and completely accepted. The celebration afterward was simple: food, music from the schoolteacher's fiddle, dancing that Elias participated in by wheeling in patterns while Martha moved around him, laughing. Tommy and his mother came bringing a loaf of bread they'd baked as a gift. Dr. Kim brought herbs for Martha's garden. Even Mrs. Chen smiled, which Daniel claimed was worth the price of admission alone. As the sun set and their friends began to drift away, Elias and Martha stood, or in his case sat, looking at the property they now shared, the laundry building where Martha would continue her work, the new workshop where Elias would build and create, the small house between them where they'd make their home. "This isn't how I imagined my life turning out," Martha said quietly. "When I was young and foolish and thought I knew what I wanted. Better or worse than you imagined? Better. So much better." She rested her hand on his shoulder. "You know what I realized? Adelaide did me a favor that day at the station." "How do you figure?" "She rejected you, which meant you had to stay in town and fight for your place here. Which meant we met. Which meant we got to know each other. Which meant we fell in love." Martha smiled. "If she'd accepted you, you'd be on her ranch right now, probably miserable, and I'd still be alone in my laundry, convinced I was meant to live my life solo. Sometimes rejection is just life pushing you towards something better." Elias thought about that. About the pain of that first rejection, about the anger and humiliation and determination it had sparked in him, about how that moment had set in motion everything that came after. Martha was right. Adelaide's rejection hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning. "I should probably thank her," he said. "Let's not go that far." Martha laughed. "But maybe we can acknowledge that sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to, even when it doesn't feel like it at the time." That night, in the house they'd made their own, Elias lay beside his wife and thought about worth. For 3 years, he'd been measured by what he'd lost: his legs, his mobility, his original plans for life. People had looked at his chair and seen limitation, damage, incompleteness. They'd called him cripple and broken and half a man, and for a long time, he'd almost believed them. But Martha had taught him something essential. Worth wasn't about perfection or meeting someone else's standards. It was about what you built with what you had. It was about showing up and doing the work and refusing to let other people's judgments define you. It was about finding people who saw you clearly, all of you, including the broken parts, and choosing you anyway. He'd come to Red Willow rejected and alone, with nothing but a chair and some tools and a desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. And it had been different, but not because the town had welcomed him with open arms. It had been different because he'd decided to stand his ground, or sit his ground as it were, and prove himself on his own terms. The mail-order husband who'd been rejected as disabled had found something better than acceptance. He'd found purpose, partnership, and a place where he belonged, not in spite of his limitations, but as a complete person who just happened to navigate the world on wheels. In the morning, Elias woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Martha's voice calling him to breakfast. He transferred to his chair, wheeled into the kitchen, and kissed his wife good morning. Then he ate the eggs she'd made, drank the coffee she'd brewed, and planned his day. He had a workshop to organize, equipment to arrange, an irrigation pump project for the rancher, and a design to finish for the school teacher's new bookshelves. It was a good day, a good life. Better than he'd imagined possible 3 years ago when he'd woken up in that hospital bed facing an uncertain future. As he wheeled out to his workshop, Martha called after him. "Don't work too late. We're having dinner with Tom and Irene tonight." "I'll be there," he promised. And he would be, because this was his life now. Not the life he'd originally planned, but the life he'd built from rejection and determination and the unexpected grace of finding someone who loved him exactly as he was. The morning sun warmed his face as he opened the workshop doors and wheeled inside. Through the window, he could see Martha hanging laundry on the lines, her movements efficient and practiced. He could hear the sounds of Red Willow waking up, horses, wagons, voices calling greetings to each other. His town, his home. Elias Crow had been rejected for being disabled, but in that rejection, he'd found something far more valuable than the acceptance of someone who couldn't see his worth. He'd found his own strength, his own purpose, and a woman who showed him what true love actually meant. It meant being seen completely. It meant being chosen, not in spite of your damage, but including it. It meant building something real and lasting with someone who understood that wholeness had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with presence. The end of rejection had been the beginning of everything else. And everything else, Elias discovered, was more than enough.